Welcome back to Narrow Path Doctrine. My name is Jim. We are doing a deeper dive into the book of Jude. We've had 2 episodes so far, episode number 3 here, where we are at verses 8 through 11. Now, in these verses, the apostle continues his stern warning about the false teachers infiltrating the church. He draws vivid parallels between these ungodly individuals and infamous rebellious figures in Scripture. Jude's language intensifies, and his examples from history demonstrate that the actions of these false teachers not only lead to personal ruin, but also pose a grave danger to the Christian community. Let's have a listen to Jude 1:8.
Likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities.
Now, the deeper dive here, this connects verse 8 to the previous verses, 5 through 7, where Jude had mentioned 3 historical examples of rebellion: unbelieving Israelites, fallen angels, and the immorality of Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as these groups faced God's judgment for their rebellion and their corruption, these false teachers are guilty of similar sins. Jude refers to these false teachers as filthy dreamers. This likely indicates that they live in a fantasy of their own making, believing their immoral actions are justified or free from consequences. Their dreams may refer to deceptive visions or delusions that they present as spiritual authority, leading others astray. We really see that today by these so-called false prophets on YouTube. The term filthy highlights the impurity of their lives and their thoughts. They are morally corrupt, which manifests in their behaviors. Now, defile the flesh, this is likely a reference to sexual immorality, similar to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah mentioned in verse 7. These individuals indulge in corrupt and sinful pleasures, violating God's design for the body and its sanctity. Despite dominion, they reject authority, whether divine or human. The word dominion likely refers to God's established order, including church leadership, spiritual authorities, and ultimately the authority of God himself. By rejecting these, they reveal their true rebellious nature. Speak evil of dignities. The word dignities, from the Greek word doxa, meaning glories, refers to those in positions of honor or spiritual beings, including angels and perhaps even God himself. These false teachers are not only rejecting authority, but slandering those who hold to it. They speak disrespectfully of things they do not understand, showing their arrogance and lack of reverence. So the deeper dive application here, Jude's condemnation of the false teachers as filthy dreamers, serves as a warning against those who twist the truth and justify immoral behavior. As believers, we are called to live in submission to God's authority and in purity, both in thought and action. We must be careful to avoid anyone who rejects God's order and indulges in sin under the guise of spiritual freedom. All right, let's move on to Jude 1:9.
Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee.
So the deeper dive here is Michael the archangel. Michael is one of the most powerful angels in God's service, that we can tell from Scripture anyway, mentioned in Daniel 10:13 and Daniel 10:21, as well as Revelation 12:7, as a defender of God's people. Despite his high status, even he showed restraint when confronting evil. This incident, the dispute over Moses' body, it is not recorded elsewhere in Scripture, but is believed to come from Jewish tradition, possibly from a non-canonical text like the Assumption of Moses. In this story, Michael is said to have confronted the devil over Moses' body. Now, the exact nature of the dispute is not clear, but it may have involved Satan's attempt to claim the body of Moses due to sin or death. We don't know for sure. Now, Michael's humility, despite Michael's power and authority as an archangel, he did not confront Satan with a railing accusation or slanderous condemnation. Instead, he said, The Lord rebuke thee. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind when we see these false teachers these days that apparently bind Satan each and every week and cast Satan out and rebuke him. Even Michael, the archangel, didn't do this. This shows that Michael relied on God's authority rather than his own, recognizing the ultimate judgment belongs to the Lord. Now, contrast with false teachers, Jude contrasts Michael's humility and restraint with the arrogance of the false teachers. While Michael, an archangel, refrained from speaking evil against Satan, these false teachers carelessly slander celestial beings and divine authority, displaying their foolishness and pride. Now, the deeper dive application here, this verse teaches us a valuable lesson in humility and reverence. Even when contending against evil, we must rely on God's authority, not our own strength. It's a warning against pride and self-reliance, particularly when it comes to matters of spiritual authority. Believers are to follow Michael's example of respect for God's order and leave judgment to the Lord. All right, let's move on to Jude 1:10.
But these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally, as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves.
Now, the deeper dive here, these speak evil of those things which they know not. Jude continues to expose the false teachers' ignorance. They slander and reject things that they don't understand, spiritual realities, divine truths, and the authority of God. Their lack of understanding shows they are spiritually blind, yet they arrogantly mock and reject what is beyond their comprehension. Man, do we see that these days as well. But what they know naturally as brute beasts, the false teachers operate on a purely natural level, driven to instinctual desires rather than spiritual understanding. Jude likens them to brute beasts which act according to base instincts rather than reason or higher knowledge. This metaphor highlights their moral and spiritual degradation. They are governed by their physical appetites and lusts, and in these things they corrupt themselves. Their indulgence in sin leads to their moral ruin and spiritual destruction. So the deeper dive application here, Jude warns that spiritual ignorance coupled with arrogance leads to self-destruction. Like brute animals, false teachers are controlled by their base instincts, and in rejecting God's truth, they end up corrupting themselves. As believers, we are called to seek understanding of spiritual truths and live according to God's wisdom, not merely by what our sinful nature desires, especially not by what our sinful nature desires. All right, let's move on finally to Jude 1:11.
Woe unto them! For they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor.
Now the deeper dive here, woe unto them. Jude pronounces a curse upon the false teachers using the language of woe, which is often used in Scripture to signify impending judgment and disaster. See Isaiah 5:8 and Matthew 23:13 through 29 for reference. Their fate is sealed because of their wickedness. Jude lists three Old Testament figures whose actions parallel the sins of these false teachers. Each of these individuals represents a different type of rebellion against God. The way of Cain, first of all, Cain, the first murderer, Genesis 4:1 through 16 for reference, rejected God's way of worship and chose his own path. His offering was unacceptable to God because it lacked faith, and his envy led him to murder his brother Abel. The way of Cain symbolizes rejecting God's way and harboring hatred and violence toward others. The error of Balaam for reward. Balaam was a prophet who was motivated by greed in Numbers 22 through 24. He initially refused to curse Israel, but he later found a way to lead them into sin by encouraging them to commit idolatry and immorality with the Moabite women. Numbers 25:1 through 3 and Revelation 2:14. Balaam represents those who corrupt others for personal gain, using their position for material reward rather than truth. And the gainsaying of Korah led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, challenging their God-given authority. Numbers 16 for reference. He and his followers were swallowed up by the earth as a sign of God's judgment. Korah represents rebellion against legitimate spiritual authority, leading others astray in the process. Now, the deeper dive application here, Jude is warning that the false teachers in his day are following in the footsteps of Cain, Balaam, and Korah. They reject God's ways, like Cain, exploit others for personal gain, like Balaam, and challenge rightful authority, like Korah. The consequences of these sins are severe, and God's judgment is inevitable for those who persist in such rebellion. As believers, we must avoid the errors of these men by seeking God's truth, rejecting greed and self-interest, and submitting to his authority. So in conclusion, Jude 8 through 11 continues the apostles' vivid denunciation of false teachers, showing how their behaviors mirror some of the most notorious rebels in biblical history. These individuals defile themselves through immorality, reject God's authority, and slander what they do not understand. Jude reminds us of the ultimate fate of such people by pointing out to the examples of Cain, Balaam, and Korah, figures who led others astray and faced God's swift judgment. All right, that is going to wrap up this third episode here in Deeper Dive, taking a look at the book of Jude. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so and click the notification bell to get updates when the next episode in this series comes out. So until next time, remember, true doctrine fuels a living, breathing faith. God bless.